Kevin Conrad from Papua New Guinea and also from the Rainforest Coalition. Thank you very much indeed for joining
Appreciate
us
it. Thank you.
here in Glasgow. At least it's warm in here, unlike outside at the moment. Stay
All
where
right.
you are for a moment,
All right. Thank
because
you.
I'm just going to introduce, so we're going to keep going on the business of costing and mindsets and the kind of thing that Kevin and many of our guests have been talking about in the last 40 minutes, because President Macron of France has just told fellow leaders that commercial calculations by businesses must now factor in nature. That means everyone and everywhere. To test if that will happen, I spoke with Sabah Hossain Chowdhury. He leads Bangladesh's Parliamentary Committee on the Environment, Forests and Climate Change. He wants the destruction of an ecosystem to be treated as a crime. He supports the idea of national parliaments considering legislation for ecocide. That includes Bangladesh. Will that radical option really help drive progress here in Glasgow?
You know, when you use the term significant, it's always relative. Significant has to be what science demands. So there might be progress, you know, there might be announcement, there might be pledges, but at the end of the day, what counts is whether what we are deciding is what science is screaming at us to do. And my concern is that we are not doing enough. There will be progress, of course. In every COP there is progress, but you're not looking at incremental progress. You're looking at something which is far more fundamental. Something which is actually going to be a breakthrough rather than small incremental changes, because that is what the science is saying.
You're talking with us at the Nature Newsroom, the emphasis being on nature.
Absolutely.
How much do you think now that the world, literally in the last few months, has understood that nature is a cost that can't be just taken for granted?
It's not just a cost, it's also an asset. You know, I mean, if you take the case of Bangladesh, you have all heard about the Sundarbans, which is one of the largest mangrove forests in the world. And the way it has protected the coastal areas of Bangladesh, every year we have cyclones or major natural events. And that has acted really as a barrier, which has saved lives, it has saved livelihoods. So we understand nature, and for us, nature-based solutions are absolutely fundamental.
But I'm talking also about the corporate world.
Yes.
Those who are essentially raping the land, raping resources, and not considering it as a cost, thinking of it as their right to do so.
That is a mindset that needs to change. I think, you know, we are seeing some indications, but it hasn't gone to the point where I would feel comfortable. In fact, one of the things that we are looking at the committee is a law on ecocide, which is, you know, about mass destruction, mass and willful destruction of nature.
But what kind of dialogues do you have with the corporate sector, whether the big corporates or the many, many, many smaller corporates?
We try to instill in them the fact that nature has a value.
Do they understand it?
I think they would understand it better if we actually had nature-based accounting. So one of the things that we are trying to do is to establish a base for a natural capital. You know, obviously we can't have it in the GDP, but we are looking at it in terms of satellite accounts. What you cannot measure, you don't value, or people outside don't value. So for us, one is advocacy, one is talking to them, one is having a dialogue, but we also need to put on the ground certain fundamentals, a framework. And I think that's why evaluation of nature, the services that we get from the ecosystem are so very important. So I think it has to be a gradual process.
As you say, you are dealing with a mindset. You're dealing with corporates who've been created not considering the value, but also the cost and the price to nature. Do you think you can move the mindset at the speed that is necessary, given the enormity of the massive challenge that we have at the moment?
That's obviously a big question, but
well,
I don't think
what's your answer?
I don't think we have the luxury of choice. We have to do it. You know,
do they understand it, the corporates?
They have to understand it. And I think that's where we have a role to play. That's why we are looking at legislative frameworks. We are looking at policies. You know, how can we protect nature? Because at the end of the day, that's our biggest asset. So how do we protect that asset and how do we move forward?
But many corporates think it's their right to exploit nature at no cost to anyone else.
Is that right? Because maybe we don't have the legislation and the policies in place. But I think once we do that, once we make it very clear, for instance, we now have a provision in the Constitution of Bangladesh which talks about protection of nature, of ecosystem services, of biodiversity, which we didn't have before. And that is under fundamental principles of state policy. So, you know, we are getting there. I think we need to move fast, as you say, because we can't afford small changes. We need big breakthroughs. We need big shifts in mindset. And that's the challenge. That's what we have
speed.
to work on, of course.
But how easy is it going to be to get these regulations through Parliament? Is
I
is there a significant obstruction and opposition to them?
I think within the parliament we are okay. You know, Bangladesh, remember, is the only country in the world which has actually taken a resolution on a planetary emergency. We didn't just talk about climate. So their nature, you know, nature being not at war with nature, taking nature to be an integral part of us. Even when we define or try to describe biodiversity, you know, biodiversity is in trees and animals that live in the jungle. We are a part of that diversity. So when we talk about nature, nature is integral to us. You know, it's a part of our culture, it's a part of our legacy, and it's part of what we will become in the future.
But let me put it to you, Mr. Chowdhury, you can declare an emergency and it can feel and sound good and make good headlines, but there are still many who can drag their feet and make it more difficult despite the emergency.
No, I think the declaration of the emergency is to show the intent, is to highlight the issue, is to show that there is political consensus. And once you've got enough hooks on the board, you know, then you can bring in other things. So for us, it was strategic, having that emergency, talking about a low carbon development pathway for Bangladesh, and it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world. I think it was necessary. Of course, it's not sufficient, but we needed to have a start. And I think the emergency is what we want to build on as we move forward.
Final thought, if I may. What about corporates and those who make money, good money, out of good business, whether domestically or externally? How much are they prepared, do you believe, to do this on their own, as opposed to waiting for you in Parliament to pass a law?
I would like to think they would do it on their own because of enlightened self-interest. Because, I mean, if you're looking at it from a long-term point of view, it may make good returns for you in the short term, but in the long term, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. But I don't think that will happen.
So they reckon that they're going to put a value on nature at last?
Well, we'll see how we go.
Sabah Hassan Chowdhury there from Bangladesh, the chair of the Committee on Environment, Forest and Climate Change, talking about the new word there, ecocide, not just genocide, ecocide. How much will that underpin much of our discussion here in the Nature Newsroom over the coming days, the coming couple of weeks? The idea that something else is emerging, not just genocide, but ecocide as well. Now, what's it like running a COP? Well, at short notice, Spain took over the mantle a couple of years ago. It had to because of unrest in Santiago in Chile. And Carolina Schmidt was the last president of the COP, COP25, which took place in Madrid, Spain. I was there. What are her expectations for COP26?
We need in COP26 to have three main, solutions for that. One has to be to go for ambition, to really fill the gap that we have an ambition. Secondly, we need cash, finance, to support the climate action at the level that we need. And third, we need real and clear rules to implement the Paris Agreement. In those three main issues, the ocean is clearly connected. So we need, to increase ambition and the climate action in the oceans. We need finance to really be able to implement the ocean protection, and we need clear rules, and that's, is one of our main goals, is to agree on the protection on 30% of all the oceans in our planet to really save the ocean for the climate action. There's no green in the world if we don't have any blue. 2/3 of the planet are covered by the oceans, and the oceans are the main regulator on climate. We cannot continue having the climate agenda and the ocean agenda as if they were separate ones. We have only one planet. We have to integrate this agenda. One of the main achievements of COP25 was being able to integrate those agendas in one. So we make the ocean one of the pillars of the climate action.
Carolina Schmidt there, no longer in charge, but she handed over the baton to Alok Sharma yesterday the British president for the next year, and what a job he's got. She remembers well what it was like in Madrid. Well, as part of our Nature Newsroom, we're giving indigenous people a voice, a very important voice, because they tend to be forgotten about or certainly marginalized and sidelined. We've already heard from Norman from the Dayak community in Indonesia. Let's go back to Indonesia, where indigenous people do play a critical role in working to conserve the environment, as we were hearing from Norman. Customary lands are their main source of livelihood, but these customary lands are not always recognized by the authorities.
Indonesia terdiri dari bermacam-macam suku dan budaya yang tersebar di ribuan pulau. Di alam Indonesia, terdapat masyarakat adat yang hidup dan menjaga wilayah adat. Meski kini modernisasi telah menjadi bagian dari masyarakat urban, masyarakat adat tetap setia dengan nilai-nilai yang mereka anut. Masyarakat adat berperan penting dalam menjaga kelestarian lingkungan di wilayah adat. Mulai dari memanfaatkan wilayah adatnya, seperti hasil hutan, hingga memelihara hutan adat, semuanya dilakukan dengan menghormati nilai-nilai luhur. Wilayah adat dapat membantu menopang ekonomi masyarakat karena hasil hutan merupakan sumber kehidupan, sumber pangan, sumber tanaman obat, dan lainnya. Hutan adat yang terjaga dengan baik membuat kita, masyarakat urban, juga bisa merasakan manfaatnya. Hutan melahirkan oksigen atau udara bersih yang penting bagi semua manusia. Hutan juga menghasilkan keragaman kehidupan flora dan fauna. Walaupun wilayah adat memiliki peran penting dalam keseimbangan alam dan ekonomi masyarakat, keberadaan wilayah adat belum mendapatkan perlindungan hukum. Padahal, dengan adanya perlindungan hukum, masyarakat adat dapat mempertahankan kawasan yang dianggap sebagai wilayah adat dari masyarakat adat. Masyarakat adat adalah bagian dari bangsa Indonesia. Namun, perjuangan mereka dalam menjaga wilayah adat tidak selalu mudah. Kita bisa membantu masyarakat adat dengan memulai langkah kecil, seperti mendukung masyarakat adat mendapatkan perlindungan hukum. Ikuti terus informasi tentang perkembangan perjuangan masyarakat adat dalam mendapatkan perlindungan hukum di situs aman.or.id.
Understanding the implications of deforestation, and particularly for the indigenous community there in Indonesia. So let's get an overall understanding of how far nature is moving. Nature is at the heart of these news operations, this newsroom, this news studio. I'm joined by Bruno Obele, who's Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, as Bruno, you're normally known. I want to understand, because you've talked about humanity at a tipping point, and you had a big conference which actually had far more energy, probably, than anyone imagined in Marseille, literally 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
What's your feeling about how much nature has gripped imagination?
You know, nature. All we eat is nature. All we breathe is done by nature. All we drink is prepared by nature. Nature is our platform. We are alive because nature supports us. And nature could also support us in tackling the climate challenge. So this is something that the more people live nearby nature, the more realize it. Farmers knows that nature is about everything. Indigenous people knows because they live with nature. We have lost this sense of relation with nature. Maybe COVID have helped us to remember about the importance.
But let me put this to you though. You can say that you've been in the job now for 18 months. You were in the Swiss government beforehand. When you look back to where you were 18 months ago, and then you look at the Dasgupta report of last February, which said nature has to be respected as a legitimate externality of every business operation and every business calculation, that wasn't on the agenda a year ago.
Dasgupta says even more than that. Dasgupta is challenging the concept.
It's a long report.
Yeah. It's challenging the concept of sustainability. It has a three-pillar system with social, economic, and environment. Dasgupta says very simply what it is. We are living on a platform, and this platform is nature. All we do is related to nature. And this is a fundamental truth that we have to keep in mind when we plan our activities. We are in the last decades, we have taken from nature, we have used nature to do everything we need to do. Look here around. The table is wood, is nature. The book is paper, it is nature. Your clothes, my clothes, everything is coming from nature. We have taken and taken and taken. And now nature is sending signals that it doesn't can anymore. And now we have to stop taking so much and reinvesting, giving back to nature.
But let me put it to you, you use the word plan. I'd like to add the word costing, because in other words, there's got to be a monetary value. It can't be assumed to be a green and verdant country, land which you can then take apart with bulldozers and everything else. You know what I'm talking about. In other words, how much do you reckon that business is prepared now to cost nature?
I don't think it is yet in the mind of everyone.
Is it moving in that direction?
But it is moving in that direction. Business has learned a lot from the climate debates, and this is simply the next wave of elements that have to be incorporated in the business calculation. Remember, 40%, even more than 40% of the global GDP is linked to nature. If we lose nature, we lose GDP, we lose growth, we lose jobs. And transforming our economies in a way that respect nature, this needs new products, new services, new infrastructure. At speed. And all of this, what it is a huge opportunity for the economy. It is the Marshall Plan, 10 times bigger than the Marshall Plan. It is about investing the money to transform our socio-economic system.
But I'm reading here, Bruno, from your Marseille Manifesto, paragraph 3, right at the top. Our window of opportunity to respond to these interlinked emergencies and share planetary resources equitably is narrowing quickly. Now, that's very diplomatic language for saying we're in a race. And that's what Boris Johnson said right at the beginning today. He said we're in a race against time. Yeah. Do you think your members, and I gather it was a very vigorous conference in Marseille, almost surprisingly vigorous, that there's a real grip which is overtaking the business sector, the political sector, to understand the core of what the IUCN stands for, which is making sure nature survives?
I don't want to appear a naive believer that everything is happening. It is difficult. It is a challenge. For an entrepreneur to spend money in a specific direction, it needs to have a certain amount of guarantees that the regulations are following, that the governments are creating level playing fields, that the customer understands the message. On the other side, the governments have to have a majority to push new regulation through, and the customer to make the right choices need an income that is high enough and needs to have opportunity to choose. So it is all the system that have to evolve in that direction. We have to make them, this is the reason because we're speaking about a transformational change. And these have to go quickly, and this is only possible in a broad alliance between political world, economic world, and societal world.
But you make a point here, respecting and harnessing the perspectives and agency of all citizens. Yeah. And what is coming through loud and clear is that the next generation in particular is becoming very impatient, very anxious. And Boris Johnson said here today, on behalf of the leaders, we're at 1 minute to midnight, which is a reference to the nuclear war, because we were 1 minute to midnight in the nuclear war. Is that the way it feels in your organization? Yeah. Is that something you're mobilizing for?
This is for sure. In ICN, we are aware about the fact that we don't have so much time, that we don't have time to waste. Maybe to say 1 minute to midnight is even very optimistic. It is something that we were telling when I was a young person. I was also very impatient and was also very anxious about the future, and we were telling it is 5 minutes before midnight. We have lost a lot of time. We have moved partially in the wrong direction, and this obliges us now to turn very quickly in the right direction. The urgency is here, and I think it is also slowly in the business world and in the political world.
So let me, final question, let me ask you, what's your vision then of how this can be achieved? Because for the United Nations Environment Agency made very clear that we're lucky if we've got 8 years. Lucky if we've got 8 years. Mm-hmm. Frans Timmermans, one of the vice presidents of the European Union, says we've really only got 2 years. In other words, there's an emergency, there's an urgency to the emergency. Yeah. And how, therefore, can you engage on this?
Taking the right decision, in putting the political signal right, in making investment in the right direction, in using the right information when we are consuming. All of us, they are asked now to take the right decision in the right direction, at the same moment. I don't know if we will succeed, but what I know it is that we have to succeed.
You've got to try.
We have to succeed because it is our life that it is at stake. If we want our children and our grandchildren to live in a world that it is better than today's world, or at least as good as it is now, then we have to make now the right decisions.
Well, thank you very much, Bruno Eberle, who's the Director General of the IUCN. Welcome. Thank you very much indeed. Stay there for one moment, because while you were talking, I was told that Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, a country of 1.4 billion people, has committed India to go net zero by 2070. That is 1 year later than China and also 1 year later than Saudi Arabia, 10 years I should say. 10 years later than Saudi Arabia and China. Saudi Arabia made its announcement this time last week. So things are moving. Net zero is being committed to, but there's still that very, very long horizon being pursued by some countries, which in the view of many scientists, 92 who've written today to the Nature magazine, saying that this has got to happen so much quicker than the science is suggesting, because otherwise really will be catastrophic. So to you all, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be doing this every day for the next 2 weeks until the closure of the COP26. So please do join us at this time every day. Bye-bye.